Welcome to the 30th Annual Canadian Conference on HIV/AIDS Research. We begin this conference by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional and unceded territory of the First Nations, Inuit and Métis. Here to welcome us is Elder Jerry Martin of the Matagami First Nation in Northeastern Ontario.
Hello, bonjour, wache, shego, washte, greetings. And I'll give you the Vulcan greeting. Welcome to this conference, this national conference. And it's not really housed in any one city or town or building, but we are on the land of Anishinaabeg people or Indigenous peoples from across the country. And I am Anishinaabe from the Anishinaabe Kingdom in Northern Ontario. And as custom goes, we welcome you into our homeland. There's many places that will be involved in this meeting, this conference. From ours, it'll be the Anishinaabe Kingdom here in northern part of Turtle Island, because we're found in 3 or 4 provinces and a bit of the northern states. So welcome, and it is a beautiful day here. The sun is shining, it's pleasant and warm. I don't know what it's like across the country, but it's still beautiful even when the rain pours. So ask that acknowledging all the Indigenous tribes of people across the country, the land, and that you be respectful and mindful of the spirits that are living and walking amongst us, okay? Now, they have asked me to do a prayer, so I'll do a generic prayer to open this meeting and to sort of set the tone for the subject matter, for what we've got to deal with over the next few days. So I'll say, bonjour. Bonjour, Gitchimanitu, Kanagamenu, Kamgigija. Shobazak, Komazak, Ninwa, Menojin, Oshe, Abanojin. Shakwan, the Gizes, Menegichikat. Thank the Creator for this beautiful day. The sun is shining. I thank the Creator for our ancestors, our grandmother and grandfather spirits that walk amongst us, for our families, for our children, for our grandchildren, and the good life that we can live. So thank you for that, Creator. Pray and ask, Creator, that let us be mindful of you always, O Great Spirit, whose voice I hear in the wind and whose breath gives life to the world. Hear us. I am small and weak and one of your many children, and I ask a favor of you, Creator. Blessing on those that are coming here so that their minds and their hearts, they speak with one voice and are open and compassionate. Creator, be with us always when we call upon you. Let us remember your teachings and your lessons that you've hidden in all across the land. So I ask, Creator, bless everybody that has come here. Let them be healthy and safe and well, and return home the same way, healthy and safe and well. Creator, help us and be with us over these next few days.
Thank you, Elder Martin. Now, it is our pleasure to welcome the Honorable Patty Hajdu, Minister of Health.
Hi, I'm Patty Hajdu, Canada's Minister of Health, and I have to tell you, it's such an honor to bring greetings on behalf of Canada, and I want to thank Dr. Carol Strike and Dr. Cherie Cater for your leadership in pulling this conference together with your teams to make sure that people can continue to gather, albeit virtually, to discuss the importance of the work being done to get to zero HIV cases and zero HIV/AIDS deaths, the work that you've been doing in many cases for decades. And I can only imagine how bittersweet it is to see how fast the world has worked on solutions to COVID-19 when so many of you have worked and suffered with the people that you serve and that have been affected by HIV/AIDS over the last several decades. That's why I think we have to continually remind ourselves as politicians, certainly policymakers across the world, of the importance of investing in research and supporting research and science, both from a prevention perspective, but also from a treatment perspective when new diseases emerge. We also have to remember that equity, racism, systemic and structural inequity all play a role in beating back pandemics. And HIV/AIDS, of course, is a powerful example of that, but so is COVID-19. Finally, I know that you'll be exploring the intersection of COVID-19 with people who live with HIV/AIDS and the extra burden that it places on marginalized communities or communities that are vulnerable for a whole host of reasons. I really look forward to hearing about your deliberations, and I want to thank you all again. It's not easy to be on the front lines. It's not easy in some cases to be in research these days. There's a lot of newfound experts out there, but we are counting on all of you. We're counting on all of you to continue that hard work, and I just want you to know that Canada is with you. Thank you.
Please welcome to the virtual stage, Dr. Jackie Gahagan from the Nova Scotia Health Authority and Dalhousie University.
Hello and welcome. Bonjour et bienvenue. My name is Jackie Gahagan. I'm a professor of health promotion at Dalhousie University, which is located in Nova Scotia and which is the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq. Although we hope to welcome you in person to Halifax, Nova Scotia in 2021 for the Canadian Association for HIV Research, due to COVID-19, we're welcoming you virtually. As some of you may recall, the last time CAHR was held in Halifax was in April 2003. And the theme for that conference was Making the Connections. Many of us have continued to stay involved in HIV research and have stayed connected over the past 18 years. The theme for CAHR2021 is Maintaining Our Focus, which is particularly important in the world of HIV research at this time, with so many competing health and social challenges as a consequence of this new pandemic. As you know, CAHR has been promoting excellence in HIV research for over 3 decades, and CAHR continues to play a vital role in HIV across disciplines, across geographies, and across diverse communities impacted by HIV. The CAHR2021 conference provides an important meeting place, albeit virtually, to discuss, debate, and coalesce around the impact HIV continues to have in the Canadian context. As someone who's had a long-standing connection to CAHR, both as a former New Investigator Award recipient and in service to the CAHR board as a former CAHR treasurer, I'm so very grateful for CAHR's ongoing leadership in maintaining our focus on HIV in this country, despite the various challenges such as funding for HIV research and for the NGO sector. We cannot become complacent about the very real ways in which HIV has and continues to impact Canadians over these last 30 plus years. In summary, I would like to acknowledge and thank the CAHR board, the CAHR executive director and staff, and the various sponsors and supporters for making CAHR 2021 possible. I wish you a highly productive and energizing conference, and I hope to see you in person in Halifax soon. Merci, thank you.
Please welcome the CAHR Board of Directors Community Representative, Kerrigan Beaver Johnson.
Good morning, I'm Kerrigan Beaver, and I would like to welcome you to the 30th Annual Canadian Conference on HIV and AIDS Research, CAHR 2021. As we gather virtually on many different territories, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I'm participating today is the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. As the community representative both on the CAHR 2021 Scientific Committee and the CAHR Board of Directors, I would like to welcome all those participating over the next few days, and in particularly those living with HIV and those working and volunteering in community-based organizations across the country. The CAHR conference is an important meeting ground for us all, community researchers and others interested in the fight against HIV, to come together each year to learn from one another. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you, Kerrigan. At this time, we would like to congratulate the winners of the CAHR-CANFAR Excellence in Research Award winners for 2020 and 2021. Congratulations to all. Now, please welcome to the stage the 2021 Red Ribbon Award winner, Ron Rosanas.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to CAHR and to my nominators for this wonderful honor. It really means the world to me. Bonjour tout le monde et merci à l'Association canadienne des chercheurs en VIH pour cette gentille reconnaissance. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that central and vital to any successes in the fight against HIV that we have achieved and hope to continue to achieve, that our success relies on the meaningful engagement of people with HIV who have shared and continue to share our lives, our bodies, and experiences in the struggle against HIV. This includes such lived experience as that of colonialism and residential school trauma that was visited on Indigenous people, and the impact of racism more broadly, particularly anti-Black racism. It is to the millions of people with HIV, both those living and those who have gone before us, to whom we are indebted. And people with HIV would not have achieved the successes and progress in taming the epidemic without the support of our allies. I say this to all of you in the virtual room today. You are our allies and absolutely essential to achieving our goals today of reducing transmission of HIV and enabling people living with or at risk of HIV to live full and healthy lives. I think of myself as a survivor, as a witness, and also as a pioneer. A survivor as someone who's been living since the earliest days of the epidemic with HIV. A witness not only to the tremendous loss of friends and colleagues, but also witness to the phenomenal scientific advances that we have made in the fight against HIV and over a relatively short period of time. I also think of myself today as a pioneer, as a founding member, if you will, of the first cohort of people growing older with HIV. And truly, being a pioneer has guided my interest in research that looks, for example, at health systems and their ability to pivot to serve the needs of people living and aging with HIV. My interest in research to improve prevention and screening for age-related comorbidities, for a search for a cure for HIV, and not least, a search for data that can be used to further health equity, particularly as it relates to access to treatment and care. Research studies that I've had the good fortune to be involved with include all of the tracks, from basic, clinical, social sciences, epidemiological, and of course, community-based research. Some highlights of my participation include involvement on the Change HIV study team led by Sharon Walmsley that is setting up the first national cohort of adults older than age 65 with HIV to investigate the factors associated with successful aging. The Panache study, led by Kate Merzen from Realize, is looking at gaps in services for older adults. The HPV SAVE study team, led by Irving Salad and Troy Grennan, along with a Catalyst grant led by Ann Burchell, is examining attitudes, screening, and prevention of anal precancer among men who have sex with men. And the LIVE, or Living with HIV study, led by Claire Kendall, has looked at novel and comprehensive models of primary health care to improve outcomes for people with HIV. The Beth Rackless-led study, using concept mapping to identify challenges with accessing and paying for medications among people living with HIV in Ontario, has been an important one in which I participated. And finally, the CanCure team study looking at the nature of myeloid cells and their impact on the HIV latent reservoir as part of the search for a cure. And the team is led by Dr. Eric Cohen in Montreal. These projects have given me the opportunity to work with the best of Canadian researchers and community friends and allies who truly understand what remains exceptional about HIV. The need to understand the social and economic determinants of health, the intersectionality of factors that combine to create vulnerability amongst particular groups, especially people from racialized communities, including Indigenous and African, Caribbean, and Black communities. men who have sex with men, trans women and men, people who are or have been incarcerated, people who use drugs, and the never-ending challenge of stigma, which all too often feels like a virus itself. Stigma, fear of HIV and the people who live with it, persist despite our efforts to spread important messages like undetectable equals untransmittable, the U equals U message, to spread it beyond the walls of our communities and into Canadian society more broadly. I'm proud of the work I've done to put together community advisory boards that are diverse and inclusive and safe spaces for people with HIV to participate in research as fully respected team members, as burgeoning citizen scientists. This has always been for me at the heart of modeling the practice of MIPA-JIPA, the greater involvement and meaningful engagement of people with HIV. We inspire leadership among our own. That said, I am constantly chastising myself for needing to be a better mentor and needing to do a better job of working with my colleagues to take what we learn and doing a better job of advocating for needed health policy change. I'm proud of what we add to research teams in terms of our living experience or expertise. We may not shine at statistical analysis or fully grasp the details of a nucleic acid-based assay, but we are able to provide meaningful oversight when we are brought in at the beginning of the process and can contribute to the development of the research protocol. We are there to assist with bioethical considerations, critical details of informed consents, recruitment strategies and promotion. Yes, we get the word out to community. And finally, with knowledge transfer and exchange. For example, we are currently working to produce a set of very community-friendly slides detailing all of the projects within the CAHR project, study team grant. And we look forward to posting those on the website. There really is an exciting project done with community members and with the young students in the laboratories. I'm especially proud as well to be a co-author of Ethics Guidance for Developing Partnerships with Patients and Researchers, an ethics guidance booklet funded by CIHR that I hope you will go online to read. It's equally relevant to researchers and to their community partners. George Smitherman, who was the former Deputy Premier of Ontario, used to say when he came into the room, "Hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help." Well, I say to every researcher, "Hi, we are from community and we are here to help." Thank you to my nominators and to CAHR for this terrific honor. Thank you to my community colleagues who showed me the way, former Red Ribbon Award recipients who I count among my friends, Louise Binder, Trevor Stratton, Maggie Atkinson, Francisco Ibanez Carrasco, John Maxwell, Evan Collins, to name just a few. I accept the award on behalf of the amazing community members, people living with HIV who have chosen to affirm our leadership as citizen scientists rather than as patients. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I look forward to a time when we can see each other in person. Thanks very much. Merci à tout le monde.
Thank you, Ron, for that message. We now turn the stage over to the CAHR 2021 virtual conference co-chairs, Dr. Shara Cater and Dr. Carol Strike.
Welcome to the 30th Annual Canadian Conference on HIV/AIDS Research, CAHR 2021. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Agreement, and is directly adjacent to Haldimand Treaty Territory. I am Dr. Shara Cater, CAHR Secretary and Co-Chair of CAHR 2021. To begin, we would like to thank this year's CAHR 2021 Scientific Committee for developing such a stellar program. We'd also want to take this opportunity to recognize the members of our CAHR Board of Directors for their hard work and volunteer commitment over the last challenging year. We would also like to take this opportunity to recognize our wonderful CAHR office staff and to thank Sea to Sky for all their work behind the scenes leading up to CAHR 2021. And of course, to all those who volunteered their time to be abstract reviewers this year. Finally, we'd like to thank the sponsors. Without their continuous generosity, CAHR would not be able to host its conference each year. As we all know too well, the continuing COVID-19 pandemic is the reason that we will not have the chance to come together in person this year. For over a year now, our lives at home and at our places of work have been greatly altered. I would now like to hand it over to Dr. Carol Strike, our CAHR president and co-chair of CAHR 2021.
Hi, I'm Dr. Carol Strike, CAHR president and the co-chair of CAHR 2021. Our current context also brings many parallels to the early days of HIV. Not so long ago, we anxiously monitored the rise and fall of new HIV case numbers around the world and carefully watched the daily updates on the spread of what was a lethal and poorly understood disease. While vaccines now offer us hope for the COVID-19 pandemic, the transmission of HIV and its treatments will continue to be a health concern in Canada and around the world. That is why the scientific committee chose as its theme this year, maintaining our focus. The attention dedicated over the past years to the COVID-19 pandemic has been critical. Indeed, many of our community have been on the front lines. At the same time as those dedicated to ending HIV, we've had to maintain our focus on preventing HIV infections and providing high quality care in challenging circumstances. Over the next few days, we will come together as a community focused on all aspects of HIV to learn from each other and to celebrate the accomplishments of Canadian HIV researchers from across all disciplines and communities. We hope you enjoy the conference, the innovations we have put in place from last year, and the stellar lineup of speakers, including Dr. Anthony Fauci, the 2021 Mark Wainberg Lecturer. Thank you in advance for your contributions, participation, and understanding of the current reality in which we live.
Please welcome Dr. Lyle McKinnon to introduce our Mark Wainberg Lecturer for 2021.
Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure today to introduce the 2021 Mark Wainberg Lecturer, Dr. Anthony Fauci. My name is Lyle McKinnon. I'm from the University of Manitoba and part of the CAHR Board of Directors. So Dr. Fauci is the director of the National Institute of Health and Infectious Diseases at the US NIH since 1984. The NIAID, which he oversees, has a budget over $6 billion per year in funding related to immune-mediated and infectious diseases. He's also become a household name, I think, and known to many of us, even outside research, during the COVID-19 pandemic and a bit of a pop culture icon. He's also been, I think, a steadying voice in what's often been a confusing and politically charged time. And this includes, I think, keeping a job while standing up to some powerful people who didn't have some ideal messaging. Prior to COVID-19, he's contributed to many emerging viral infectious diseases such as Ebola, Zika, and influenza and others. But really, he's focused much of his career on clinical and basic HIV research. And he remains the chief of the Lab of Immunoregulation and continues to attend lab meetings and contribute to HIV research. Prior to HIV, actually, he's also had an extensive career in studying immunodeficiencies. Dr. Fauci is one of the most cited immunologists since 1980, which I think means ever. He's advised 7 US presidents and received multiple awards, including the Canada Gardner Global Health Award and the US Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest award bestowed to a US citizen. I think almost more impressively, he's been played by both Brad Pitt and Kate McKinnon on Saturday Night Live. In addition to all of these different achievements and leadership roles, I think he's really one of the best scientific communicators out there, able to distill a lot of information into a relatively short period of time. So we're very much looking forward to his talk today.
Greetings. My name is Tony Fauci, and I'm honored to deliver this year's Dr. Mark Wainberg Lecture at the Canadian Conference on HIV/AIDS Research. Mark was an extraordinary scientist and colleague, and a true pioneer in HIV/AIDS research and advocacy. It is a privilege to address you today in tribute to Mark's legacy. As you can see from this first slide, I'm going to be speaking about lessons from the concurrent HIV/AIDS and COVID-19 pandemics and the lessons that we've learned back and forth between these two concurrent outbreaks. First, let's take a look at the scope of HIV/AIDS in the world today. As of the most recent count, as you can see, as we know these numbers well, 38 million people living with HIV, 1.7 million new infections just in 2019, the latest date when this has been done, and 690,000 deaths. Looking at the COVID-19 globally, the worst pandemic that we've had of a respiratory-borne illness in over 100 years since the infamous and historic influenza pandemic of 1918. Now, almost 150 million cases and over 3 million deaths globally. Just as a note, coming from the United States myself, the United States is one of the worst hit countries in the world, together with Brazil and India, with 32 million cases of COVID-19 and over 570,000 deaths, and still counting. I'm going to be talking about 6 specific areas, and I'll touch briefly on each of them just to give you the highlights. First, the epidemiology and natural history. And one of these issues is the role of asymptomatic infection, which was an interesting similarity between the two. You remember possibly an old slide that I used to show years and years ago about what we referred to then as clinical latency, when individuals would be infected even before we had a test for HIV, and would go for literally years without any noticeable symptoms and spreading the infection beneath the radar screen. The same holds true for COVID-19, and we only recognized this a few months into the outbreak, namely that about 1/3 to 40% of the people infected with SARS-CoV-2 are without symptoms and remain without symptoms. With regard to the transmission, between 50 and 60% of the transmissions result from an asymptomatic infected person, either pre-symptomatic before they ultimately develop symptoms, or individuals who truly will never develop symptoms. But the bottom line is that at least half of the infections are spread from a person without symptoms. The other issue is the role of health disparities in both of these extraordinary pandemics. The epidemics exacerbate health disparities when you talk about HIV, and we have seen that clearly. With the United States as an example, 13% of our population is African American, and yet 43% of all the new diagnoses are among African Americans. And of those, 60% are men who have sex with men, and of those, 75% are young individuals under the age of 35. This is similarly true with COVID-19. We know now very clearly that there is a clear-cut disparity in both getting infected and the severe outcome of infection among African Americans, Hispanics, and Native Americans. And the hospitalization and death data prove this out. This is the data from hospitalization rate per 100,000 among various demographic groups. And as you can see in the upper bar, Native Americans and Alaskan Natives, African Americans, Hispanics have a considerably greater rate of hospitalization than whites. The death rate here measured in time ratios, namely 2.4 times more likely that a Native American will die from COVID than compared to a white, and blacks 1.9, Hispanics 2.3. Quickly, moving on to therapeutics, the need for multiple shots on goal and the importance of combination therapy, something that was clearly established very successfully during the HIV/AIDS earlier years. This is the slide again that I've shown many, many times, indicating the HIV replication cycle and the targets for antiviral therapy that we're so familiar with the various subgroups, protease inhibitors, integrase inhibitors, reverse transcriptase, et cetera. This has led, as we all know, to spectacular advances in the therapy of persons with HIV, such that we now can suppress the virus indefinitely to below detectable levels. I could not talk about this without mentioning one of the many contributions of Mark. His famous paper in 1989 that he presented at the scientific meeting of CIDA in the international conference that year, where he showed the in vitro activity of a new drug, in this case, lamivudine, which became very soon one of the top drugs when we were dealing with 2-drug and then ultimately 3-drug combinations for HIV. Switching over to COVID-19, we now have a number of therapeutics that have been tested in various clinical trials. Some have received FDA approval, like remdesivir. Others have received emergency use authorization, such as monoclonal antibodies. And there are a number of other therapeutics. The important thing to emphasize with regard to COVID-19 is the clear separation of what one does for early to moderate disease, namely attacking the virus itself, versus late disease, which is really driven by an aberrant immunologic or inflammatory response, hence the helpful effect of dexamethasone in decreasing 28-day mortality in people on ventilators or requiring high-flow oxygen. But similar to the replication cycle of HIV, which I showed on a prior slide, on this slide, you have the replication cycle of SARS-CoV-2 with similar types of vulnerable targets for direct antiviral therapy. And in fact, the future of therapy for SARS-CoV-2 would be identification of these vulnerable targets, and similar to what we did with HIV, to design drugs that would inhibit these vulnerable targets. Moving on now to prevention, namely the non-vaccine prevention, before we get to vaccines. And this is a really, I think, fascinating story, because while vaccine science continues for all of us for HIV, therapeutic interventions have played a critical role in HIV prevention. And we're all very familiar with the fact that treatment for persons with HIV and treatment in general does equal prevention in 2 subcategories. Treatment as prevention, knowing that you can get the viral load to below detectable level, making it virtually impossible to transmit to an uninfected person if you have an undetectable viral load, and pre-exposure prophylaxis. In addition, monoclonal antibodies for the prevention of HIV infection. We're all familiar with the antibody-mediated prevention, or AMP, study of VRC01, a single monoclonal antibody that has been tested now on multiple continents in 11 countries. The early indication of data from that trial is promising, though certainly not complete, in the sense that it did not prevent overall HIV-1 acquisition more effectively than placebo. However, a single monoclonal antibody was effective at preventing acquisition of strains sensitive to that broadly neutralizing antibody. So it was a proof of concept that broadly neutralizing antibody prophylaxis can be effective, very likely if used in combination. And monoclonal antibodies are also being used now for the SARS-CoV-2 infection. And I just refer you to one particular study that was presented a month ago, at the CROI meeting. And in this situation, a cocktail of 2 monoclonal antibodies from Regeneron was shown to be very effective in preventing, among household exposures, the not only infection, but even those who had infection, there was a much lower viral load and a much shorter duration of detectable viral RNA in their nasopharynx. Now, what about vaccine prevention? Again, another interesting comparison and relationship between these two approaches. HIV vaccine development clearly remains a key scientific challenge. However, the advances in HIV vaccinology actually, without getting an HIV vaccine, paved the way for highly successful SARS-CoV-2 vaccines. And let me explain. It goes back to the concept of structure-based vaccine design. Several groups throughout my country and the world have been working on structure-based vaccine design for HIV. One of the hubs of this is the NIAID Vaccine Research Center, which, as many of you know, does work from fundamental basic research up through and including clinical trials. In the team in the VRC, the person circled in red is Peter Kwong, who is the structural biologist intensively working on HIV. Peter has shown that the stable soluble structure of the HIV envelope trimer in its prefusion form is likely the optimal structure for binding to and inducing broadly neutralizing antibody. Work in a number of other labs also showing this very elegantly, from Ian Wilson, from Dennis Burton, from John Moore, and others. However, simultaneous with that work were people in the VRC who were working on respiratory syncytial virus. And one of them now shown in the upper right with the other red circle is Barney Graham. And Barney Graham teamed up with Peter Kwong and Jason McLellan, who was a member of the lab at that time. And what they did is that they showed that the prefusion F protein of RSV was clearly much more immunogenic and had to be stabilized by the induction of certain mutations because it was an unstable molecule, even though it was highly immunogenic. They successfully stabilized this. It became a very, very important immunogen for RSV, and successful work continued. And then along came the coronaviruses, the same sort of collaboration between structural biologists, as shown on this slide, with Jason McLellan and Andrew Ward and Barney Graham, to develop a structure-based design of the prefusion MERS spike antigen related to the MERS outbreak, another coronavirus that we're all familiar with. And then when SARS-CoV-2 came, they immediately used that technology to stabilize the prefusion form of the spike protein, which has become now the go-to immunogen for virtually all but one of the successful vaccines that are being pursued and supported in the United States. And here they are, 6 companies, 3 platforms, mRNA, adenovirus, and recombinant protein with adjuvant. Similarly now, the SARS vaccine clinical trials drew lessons and expertise from HIV. The HIV Clinical Trials Network, which so successfully led to the proof of the efficacy of HIV drugs has now, in many respects, been converted to be part of the COVID-19 prevention network, contributing greatly to the clinical trials to prove the efficacy and safety of COVID-19 vaccines. And here's a world map showing some of the locations of the COVID-19 prevention network. Here, as you know, many of these are sites that we used for the HIV clinical trial network. The vaccines have been spectacularly successful. Already now we have 3 vaccines, the Moderna and BioNTech Pfizer mRNA, and the J&J human Ad26, with others in the pipeline soon to be going forth to possibly get an emergency use authorization. Now, the issue of efficacy versus effectiveness, we're all familiar with that. Efficacy being what you show in a clinical trial, and effectiveness is what actually happens with that particular intervention in the community. So let's go back to HIV. And we know now that the effectiveness in the community is extraordinary. We reviewed this in a JAMA article a couple of years ago, where we showed clearly and unequivocally that if you bring the viral load to below detectable level, that undetectable does actually equal untransmittable. The same way when you look at the real world effectiveness of the vaccines of SARS-CoV-2, now that they are out there, shown in multiple studies, and these are just 2 examples of the University of Texas healthcare providers, an exceedingly low infection rate of 0.05%. And the CDC summarized in an MMWR this past month in the early part of April, again, exceedingly low infection rates in people vaccinated with one or the other of the mRNA vaccines. Results from Israel show very, very clearly when they reached a certain inflection point, namely around 61% of people vaccinated, you had a dramatic diminution in cases in which the B117 predominated, showing that the vaccines are good not only against the original Wuhan strain, but the mutated variant B117, which is dominant in the United States. And then finally, denialism, something that those of us who've been involved in HIV/AIDS for several decades remember quite clearly, that back in the earlier days, there were people, particularly like Peter Duesberg and some of his colleagues, who denied that HIV was the cause of AIDS, leading to a very, very difficult situation, particularly in South Africa, when the president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki at the time, did not allow government subsidized distribution of antiviral drugs because of a denial of the fact that HIV actually caused AIDS, leading to the unnecessary death of so many people in South Africa. In some respects, we face the same thing with SARS-CoV-2, where people, even when we have people hospitalized and dying right in front of them, still some people actually calling this a hoax or a conspiracy theory. A very sad comparison and analogy between these 2 diseases. I'll end on this slide, which I wrote a paper with my colleague, Greg Folkers, almost now 20 years ago, showing and predicting that the AIDS research model would have major implications for how we address other infectious diseases of global health importance. And the relationship with what I've shown you over the past several minutes between what went on with HIV decades ago and what's going on right now in the response to COVID-19 is clearly shown by our reflective memory of the fact that we have now gone through two hysteric pandemics, one of which we are still dealing with in a very intense way, but they have relationships between them that are very helpful in our response to the current one. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.